It had been years, years since I'd set foot in any military facility, and even longer since I'd walked through the steel doors of Area 51. But there I was, sitting in the back of a black SUV, my hands clenched on my lap, feeling the old tension rise in my chest as we sped through the Nevada desert. The sun was dipping low, casting long, stretching shadows across the barren earth. The wind howled outside, carrying the scent of dust and heat, the kind of dry air that burns your throat after just a few minutes of breathing it in. I told myself that I wouldn't go back. The life I left behind was full of secrets, secrets that had eaten at me for years. But curiosity has a way of making you do things you swore you'd never do again. The call had come in the middle of the afternoon, cutting through the silence of my small apartment. The name on the screen was familiar, and that alone almost made me hang up. Director Wells. A man I had respected once, a man who had signed my retirement papers not so long ago. His voice was just as it always had been. Authoritative, calm, and calculating. "Sam, we need you back. It's important." I wanted to tell him to shove it, but I didn't. The truth was, something inside me wanted to know what was happening. Something inside me still craved the rush of solving problems that no one else could even understand. When I'd retired, I thought I was done with it all. The endless missions, the secret projects, the technology that no one was supposed to know about. I was happy with my new life, my routine, a quiet existence where no one asked me questions I couldn't answer. But there was always that gnawing curiosity, the one that comes from knowing something that others can't even fathom. And Wells knew it. That's why he called me. I could still refuse, I told myself, but I knew that wasn't going to happen. So here I was, heading straight for a place I thought I'd left behind forever. The SUV finally slowed, and the gates of Area 51 came into view. The security guards didn't even ask for my identification. They knew who I was, and they knew what I'd done. They just waved me through, and I felt that old unease creeping back. The place hadn't changed much. The same drab buildings, the same concrete paths, the same feeling of isolation. But something in the air felt different. It felt colder, more intense. As we drove deeper into the facility, I noticed that the world outside seemed even quieter than usual. The usual chatter of workers, the hum of machinery, it was all gone. The whole base felt eerily still, like it was holding its breath. I couldn't help but wonder why I was being called back, what had changed. My mind raced with possibilities as the SUV came to a stop in front of a large, nondescript building. The doors opened before I had even fully registered the halt, and 2 security officers stepped out to escort me inside. We moved quickly through the hallways, my footsteps echoing against the cold, sterile floors. It felt like a dream, like I was walking through the remnants of a life I'd long forgotten. There were no small talk, no pleasantries, just cold efficiency. The only sound that filled the air was the soft buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead. Then, we arrived at a heavy steel door. Wells was standing there, waiting for me. "Sam," he greeted me, his voice the same as it had been all those years ago. Steady, measured, but with a hint of something else behind it. Something I couldn't quite place. "You look different." "Don't remind me," I said, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. The last few years had aged me in ways I didn't want to admit, and I could feel the weight of that history hanging between us. Wells gave a half-hearted chuckle. He hadn't changed much. Still the same sharp eyes, the same rigid posture, but something in his gaze was different now. There was a nervousness there, something I hadn't seen before.
"We wouldn't have called if it wasn't important," he said, his tone shifting. "We need your expertise, Sam. One last time, and then you can go back to whatever life you've built. But it's bigger than anything we've dealt with." I didn't respond at first. I was looking at the door, trying to figure out what was behind it. I felt a strange sense of unease building in my chest, like I was about to open a door I shouldn't. But I wasn't here to second-guess myself. "You want me to help you with something," I said finally, forcing my voice steady. "I'm assuming you're not showing me this because you found a new way to make coffee or invent new ways to track aliens." Wells didn't smile. "No, Sam. This is real." He turned and motioned for me to follow him. I did, my mind racing with questions, none of which I could ask. As we walked down the narrow hallway, past security checkpoints and retinal scans, I felt a rising tension. I had been inside this building before many times, but it had never felt like this, like I was walking deeper into something I wasn't prepared for. We reached another door, But this one was different. It was larger, heavier. "You wanted to see it," Wells said. And for the first time, his voice wavered just slightly. He wasn't the same man I had worked with before. This time, there was something more. Something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The door slid open with a low hum, revealing a dark room. There, standing in the center of it, was a massive stone-like structure. Something I could only describe as a gate. At least 10 feet high, covered in strange, weathered symbols I couldn't quite make out. It was something you might expect to see in a museum, not in a military facility. The air around it hummed, vibrating with an energy that made me instinctively take a step back. Wells stepped forward, crossing his arms. "This is it," he said softly. I stared at the gate, feeling both awe and confusion. I wanted to ask what it was, how it worked, but I didn't. Something inside me told me I didn't want to know the answer. "What is it?" I asked anyway. Wells didn't hesitate. "A doorway," he said simply. "To another world." I stared at him, trying to process the words. "Another world?" He nodded. "Not just another country, Sam. Another dimension, another reality. We've been studying it for months now, and every 18 hours it opens. But it doesn't open to anywhere on Earth." The words hung in the air between us. My first instinct was to laugh, to call him crazy. But he wasn't joking. I could see it in his eyes. He believed it. "Every 18 hours, Wells continued, "it opens. And we need someone to go through. We've learned as much as we can from this side, but we need eyes on the other side. We need you to go in, take notes, and bring back whatever you can. We don't know what's on the other side, Sam, but it's important." I didn't know what to say. My mind raced. A part of me wanted to walk out right then, but another part of me was curious. Curious in the way only someone who had seen too much could be. "How long do I have to stay?" I asked, my voice shaking just slightly. Wells glanced at his watch. 30 minutes. That's all we can safely manage. After that, the gate will close for another 18 hours. I looked at the gate again, feeling the magnetic pull of it. The air around it shimmered, as though it were alive. I didn't know why, but I knew one thing. I was about to step into something bigger than anything I had ever experienced. I turned to Wells. "What's on the other side?" He gave me a look, one that made the hairs on my neck stand up. "You'll see for yourself." I felt a strange energy in the air, something I couldn't explain, as if the very room we stood in was alive. Wells's eyes were focused on me, waiting for me to take the next step. He didn't say anything, but the look in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't asking me to do this for him or the military. He was asking me to do this because no one else could. I was the only one who knew how to make sense of these things, these unknowns. I stared at the gate for a long moment, my mind swirling with 1,000 questions. Part of me wanted to refuse, to tell Wells that I was done with this kind of life. But something else, something darker and more insistent, tugged at me. Curiosity. I had always been curious about the unknown, about what lay behind closed doors, behind secrets too dangerous to share. And here it was. Another one of those doors, bigger than anything I had ever encountered. "Sam," Wells said, his voice low, "it's your call. You can leave, but the truth is we need you. You're the only one qualified." I nodded, though I wasn't sure what I was agreeing to. "I know," I muttered. Wells motioned toward the center of the room. "The gate's about to open. When it does, you'll have 30 minutes to step through and get back. You can't afford to waste any time. We've set everything up. The temporal anchor will keep you synced with Earth's timeline, and the biosync lenses will help you navigate and process everything." I glanced at the devices lying on a nearby table. The temporal anchor was a sleek bracelet that would keep track of the time differential between Earth and whatever world lay beyond the gate. The biosync lenses were designed to enhance my vision and filter out environmental disruptions, but I wasn't convinced they would help against whatever I was about to face. "Just don't die on me, Sam," Wells said, a rare flicker of emotion in his tone. I couldn't tell if he was joking. He had always been good at hiding his emotions, but in that moment, I could sense the tension beneath the surface. We both knew this wasn't going to be simple. I swallowed hard. "I'll be back." I didn't believe my own words. Not really. The gate began to hum again, louder this time, as if it were waking up. The stone-like structure shimmered, its surface rippling like water in a breeze. I could feel it. an undeniable pull, a magnetic force drawing me in. My breath caught in my throat. I stepped forward, trying to ignore the flutter of fear in my chest. "Don't look back," Wells warned. His voice was barely a whisper now, as if speaking too loudly would break the fragile silence that surrounded the gate. "Once you go through, there's no telling what will happen. Be careful, Sam." Without another word, I took a deep breath and stepped through the gate. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, everything shifted. I felt a wave of cold rush over me, not like the dry desert cold, but something otherworldly. The air was dense, almost thick, like I was walking through water instead of air. I stumbled as the ground beneath me shifted. My senses reeled as I was bombarded with a strange mix of smells, earthy, metallic, and somehow sweet. I gasped, the cold air burning my lungs. I wasn't on Earth anymore. I could feel it in my bones, in the way my body responded to the atmosphere. This wasn't home. The landscape stretched before me, a vast alien world. The sky above was a dull gray, not the deep blue I was used to. The clouds were different too, swirling in patterns I couldn't understand. The trees, if you could call them that, were massive and strange, their bark twisted and coiled like some ancient living thing. Their branches reached out like arms, thick vines hanging from them like they were waiting to grab me. I stood frozen for a moment, taking it all in. The world felt alive, too alive. It was like the entire place was breathing, watching, waiting for me to make a move. I wasn't sure if I was walking into a jungle or into some kind of living, breathing organism. The strange, shimmering light from above cast an eerie glow on the ground, revealing thick, fern-like plants that rose from the earth. Their leaves were a deep, unnatural shade of blue, making the landscape seem even more surreal. The colors here weren't like anything on Earth. Everything was vivid, almost glowing, but also unsettling in its otherness. I activated the temporal anchor device on my wrist, its low buzz reminding me of the ticking clock. 30 minutes. That was all I had. Taking another cautious step, I started moving deeper into the alien world. The ground beneath me was soft, almost spongy, like I was walking on moss but denser, as if the earth itself had a pulse. I paused for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. The whole environment felt oppressive, like it was wrapping around me, consuming my every move. The silence was deafening. No birds, no wind, just the occasional rustle of the leaves. It was almost like the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to make a mistake. Then I saw it. A movement, just on the edge of my vision. My heart skipped a beat, and I whipped around. A large, insect-like creature skittered across the ground, its body segmented like an enormous beetle. It paused for a moment, staring at me with its two large eyes, then darted off into the underbrush. I froze, instinctively taking a step back. Something wasn't right about that creature. It wasn't the size or the shape, it was the way it moved. Too quickly, too fluid, like it wasn't quite real. I was starting to realize just how different this world was, and how little I knew about it. I continued on, my eyes darting around, taking in every detail, my pulse quickening. The further I went, the more the landscape changed. The trees became more twisted, their bark dark and rough. The ground was covered in thick vines that seemed to move, shifting and coiling as if they were alive. I stopped in my tracks when I saw something strange. There, etched into the bark of one of the trees, was a series of symbols. The markings were rough, weathered by time, but still legible. They weren't any language I recognized, but something about them felt familiar, like I had seen them before in a dream, or somewhere in my past. I stepped closer, reaching out to trace one of the symbols with my fingers. The moment I touched the tree, a shock of cold ran through me. The symbol felt alive, pulsing under my touch. I jerked my hand back, my heart pounding in my chest. "What the hell is this?" I whispered, my voice barely a tremor in the heavy air. I pulled away, trying to shake the feeling of the tree's pulse beneath my fingers. The eerie sensation lingered, as if the world around me was aware of my presence, waiting to see what I would do next. It wasn't just the trees or the plants, it felt like the very atmosphere itself was watching me. The weight of it pressed down on me, making each step feel like I was sinking deeper into something ancient and unknowable. The temporal anchor device vibrated faintly against my wrist, snapping me out of my thoughts. I checked it quickly. Still stable, still synced with Earth, but the numbers were ticking down. I had maybe 15 minutes left before I had to get back. I couldn't waste any more time, but the world around me seemed to be pulling me deeper. Every time I thought I had a clear path ahead, the ground shifted. Vines would stretch out, almost like they were trying to trip me. The trees seemed to lean closer, their branches twisting in unnatural ways. It was all wrong, but so beautiful. I pressed forward, determined to make the most of the time I had left. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, maybe just a clue, anything that could explain what was going on. But the deeper I went, the more unsettled I felt. The air was thick with a strange, shimmering mist. It clung to my skin, making me feel heavier like I was moving through a dense fog. The ground beneath me became softer, the plants growing thicker and more entangled. The oddest thing, though, was the silence. There were no animals, no sounds of insects or birds. Just an eerie quiet, punctuated only by the rustling of the plants. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. The path ahead seemed to open into a small clearing, and that's when I saw it. Another symbol. But this one wasn't etched into a tree. It was on the ground, in the soil, partially covered by moss. I knelt down, brushing the dirt away. The symbol was identical to the ones on the tree, but this one was different. It had been worn down by time, faded, but I could still make out the shape, and that's when I saw it. A footprint. A human-like print, but slightly elongated, the toes sharp and pointed. It wasn't just any print. It was older, deeper, as if it had been here for years. I stood up, my breath coming faster. I wasn't alone here. There had been others. Others who had come before me, and I had no idea what had happened to them. I kept moving, but my heart was racing now. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was closing in on me. Something was watching. My heart was pounding in my chest as I stood in the small clearing, the eerie silence pressing in on me from all sides. The footprint in the soil seemed to pulse with a life of its own, as if it were reminding me of the people, human-like creatures who had walked this path before me. The strange markings, the overgrown underbrush, and now the foot-shaped imprint all felt like pieces of a story I couldn't quite make sense of. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. The temporal anchor buzzed faintly on my wrist, reminding me that time was ticking away. I couldn't afford to lose myself in the mystery of it all, but it was hard not to. The air itself seemed to hold secrets waiting for someone like me to uncover them. I turned away from the footprint, trying to steady myself. The underbrush ahead grew thicker, and the path seemed to twist and bend, like the world around me was shifting, rearranging itself. It felt as if the landscape was alive, as if it had a purpose, a will of its own. The air was thick now, almost suffocating, and it felt colder than before. My skin tingled, not from the temperature, but from the feeling that something was drawing closer. I didn't know what it was, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up as the atmosphere around me seemed to shift again. Then I heard it, a faint rustling sound, like something moving just beyond my line of sight. I froze, my heart hammering. I wasn't alone. I quickly crouched low, trying to make myself as invisible as possible in the dense undergrowth. The sound came again, closer this time. A snap of a twig, the crunch of something large moving through the foliage. I strained my ears, listening intently. There was something deliberate about the way it moved, like it was hunting, or perhaps it was just curious. My thoughts raced. Should I stay hidden, or should I move quickly and try to get to the gate? The 30-minute window was closing, and I couldn't waste any more time. I turned my attention back to the path ahead. The strange symbols had been a clue. Maybe this was my way out. Then I saw it. Through the trees just beyond the clearing, I saw a faint flicker of light, a glow that seemed out of place in this dark, oppressive world. My pulse quickened. The gate. It had to be the gate. Without thinking, I bolted forward, my feet pounding against the soft, sponge-like ground. The mist hung thick in the air, and my breath came faster, my legs burning as I pushed myself harder. The world around me was blurring now, my focus narrowing to just one goal: get to the gate before it closed again. I was close. So close. But the rustling sound came again, closer this time. I dared to glance behind me for a split second. A figure stood in the shadows, its shape tall and thin, but somehow wrong. It wasn't quite human. Its skin was pale, nearly translucent, and its eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. It was watching me, and for a brief moment, I felt that same icy fear that had plagued me ever since I stepped through the gate. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't let fear take over. I pushed myself forward, heart racing, feet moving faster than I thought possible. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching. I didn't care. I had one goal now, the gate. I saw it, a glimmer of light through the trees, faint but unmistakable. The gate was ahead, its stone-like surface shimmering as it flickered in and out of focus. My heart skipped a beat. I was almost there. The gate was close enough now that I could almost reach out and touch it, but as I took a step toward it, something else happened. A shadow shifted in the corner of my eye. The figure I had seen earlier was no longer standing still. It was moving toward me, gliding through the mist like a specter. Its movement was too fluid, too unnatural. My blood ran cold. I was being followed. No, I was being hunted. The creature, if that's what it was closer now. I could feel its presence behind me, like it was waiting for me to make a mistake, to slow down. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run faster, but I couldn't. My legs felt heavy, like the atmosphere itself was working against me, weighing me down. I glanced over my shoulder again. The creature was still there, its pale eyes locked onto mine. It was almost too far to see clearly, but I could tell it was smiling, or at least it looked like it was. There was something off about its face, something not quite human. I didn't want to think about it. I had to focus on the gate. With the last bit of strength I could muster, I pushed myself forward. My breath came in shallow gasps, and the sweat on my forehead stung as it mixed with the mist around me. The gate was so close. I could feel the pull of it, like it was calling to me, pulling me back to safety. I reached out, my hand trembling as I touched the surface of the gate. The cold, metallic feel of it sent a jolt through my body. I could hear it, the hum of the gate, louder now, growing stronger as I touched it. But something was wrong. The ground beneath me seemed to shift, as if the entire landscape was buckling under the weight of the tension. I looked down, and to my horror, I saw that the mist was swirling around my feet, thickening, wrapping around my legs. It was like the world itself didn't want me to leave. The gate flickered, its glow pulsing erratically. The countdown on my temporal anchor device flashed red. My heart dropped. The gate was closing. I was running out of time. "No!" I screamed, my voice cracking as I pushed harder against the gate, trying to force it to stay open. But the more I pushed, the weaker the light became. The mist around me thickened, and I could feel my connection to Earth slipping away. The creature was closer now, moving swiftly, its long, bony fingers reaching out toward me. It was so close. Too close. I slammed my hand against the gate one last time, shouting in frustration, in desperation. "Come on!" And then, just as I thought I would be consumed by the mist, just as I thought the world would swallow me whole, the gate pulsed one final time, brighter than ever. The world around me snapped. The creature's screech echoed in my ears, but it was drowned out by the deafening hum of the gate. I was falling forward, my body pulled through the threshold as the world around me dissolved into nothing. I stumbled as I crossed the threshold, my body colliding with the cold floor of the hangar. I gasped for air, the familiar smell of sterile metallic space filling my lungs. The moment my feet hit the ground, the weight on my shoulders lifted. I was back, but it didn't feel like I was truly home. I looked around, disoriented, still feeling the weight of the alien world pressing against my mind. The hum of the gate behind me faded, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. I was in the same place, but everything was wrong. It didn't feel like Earth anymore. I felt like an outsider, like I didn't belong. Wells was standing by the table, looking at me with a mixture of concern and relief. The assistants were gathered around him, their eyes flicking from me to the monitors. They weren't saying anything, but I could feel their silent judgment. I felt different, and I wasn't sure if that was a good thing. I rubbed my forehead, trying to shake the fog from my mind. My head was spinning. My thoughts were scattered, as if the two worlds I had passed through were fighting for dominance in my brain. Wells stepped forward, his face hardening as he approached. "You're back, but you're not the same, are you?" I didn't respond. I couldn't. I had no idea how to explain what had happened. How could I? How could I tell them what I had seen, what I had felt? How could I explain the twisted creatures, the alien world, the way it had changed me? They didn't know what it was like, to be so close to something you couldn't understand, to feel it pulling at you, wrapping itself around your thoughts, making you question everything. Wells's eyes were fixed on me, his expression unreadable. What happened, Sam? What did you see? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I was back, but a part of me was still there in that alien world. It wasn't just the place I had been. It was inside me now. The gate hadn't just taken me somewhere else. It had taken a part of me with it, and I didn't know if I could ever get that part back. The days that followed were a blur. I tried to settle back into my life at Area 51, but it wasn't the same. I couldn't focus. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen, what I had brought back with me. The memories of that world, of the creatures, of the way it had felt to step through the gate. They haunted me. Wells continued to watch me with a clinical gaze, as if waiting for something to break. But I didn't break. I couldn't. And yet every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. The gate. The alien world. The faces of those who had come before me. I didn't know if I could ever truly leave it behind. The gate had opened once, and it would open again. But I wasn't sure if I would ever be ready to cross through it again. One thing was certain. I wasn't the same person I had been before. And maybe, just maybe, I never would be.